Welcome back, party people, to Second Cup. I am your host, Tim Heller. My guest today for this episode is my friend, Adam Roberts. Buckle up, because Adam does a lot. Adam is a vocal coach, PAVA Recognized Vocologist and music director, co-founder and chief creative officer of Resolution Creative, co-founder and producing artistic director of Tilt Performance Group, and the director of music at St. Luke United Methodist Church here in Austin, Texas. Before we dive in, if you've been listening to the show and enjoying it, I'd like to invite you to show support for us in any of the following ways. First is by sharing episode links on social media and tagging @TimHellerCreative. Second is by rating, leaving reviews, and subscribing in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening and watching. Third is subscribing, liking, and commenting on YouTube, Tim Heller Creative. And finally, if you want to support financially, you can Venmo me @TimHellerCreative or reach out to me through email at tim@timhellercreative.com. We can discuss sponsoring one or several episodes or just shoot the shit. Now, top off your beverage, get comfy, and enjoy this episode of Second Cup with Adam Roberts. Amazing. Yes. God, I love those glasses. Those are freaking dope.
Thank you. Yeah, they're fun. They're fun. Gotta have the glasses game.
Yeah, especially for us people with terrible eyesight. You gotta, right. If you gotta have the thick lenses, you gotta have something bold to go with them. That's awesome.
100%.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for a little conversation this morning. We have lots to talk about, and I'm so excited to have you on and just to see you again. It's been a minute. Life has been crazy since the last time we chatted.
I know. How's my sound?
It's great. It's great.
It is.
I think.
Okay, cool. Good.
Yeah. Am I coming through okay? I'm just getting used to the new gain levels on this podcast mic, and I feel like I'm not getting enough power to it. So
you sound awesome.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So Adam K. Roberts, I would love for the listeners to hear a little bit about you, for those who aren't familiar, like who you are, where you're from, where you're at now, what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you said, my name is Adam Roberts, and I am an Austin-based artist and creative. I wear several hats around the creative community. I am a co-founder and the producing artistic director of Tilt Performance Group, which is a theater company that is dedicated to shattering disability stereotypes. We are comprised of artists with disabilities, and we've been around for 9 years now. Next year will actually be our 10th year anniversary. So very excited.
Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you. I'm also the co-founder and the chief creative officer of Resolution Creative, which is a company that is now, close to 3 years old, I suppose. And we do creative work for artists and creatives. So branding and digital media strategy, but also my partner, Dave Hawks, is an amazing photographer and videographer. And so we get assets for clients that are for content and things like that. So we do a lot of work between here, New York City, and sometimes LA. So that is something that has been very rewarding. And I also am a vocal coach and a vocologist, which is a term that a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with, but it's really looking sort of at the scientific side of the voice, vocal anatomy, physiology, perception, and also ways in which medical interventions can happen with the voice with injured and disordered voices. So that's sort of my approach with a lot of the clients with whom I work, whether they be speaking voice clients or singing clients. And finally, I am the musical director for St. Luke United Methodist Church here in Austin. And I also do a lot of musical direction and conducting around town at the Long Center and at various other places for sort of one-off productions and things like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have a lot of free time to kind of just noodle around.
On occasion.
Yeah. Well, I remember. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's great because I think a lot of folks who are in the arts and the creative sectors don't have enough to do, or they don't necessarily know how to get to do the things that they want in a practical way. And I'm just so grateful and blessed to be able to do these things And I certainly don't take that for granted. So even in the times when it seems overwhelming and like there's too much to do, that's what I do. I step back and say, look, so many people would love to be doing what you're doing. And so let's have the gratitude for it.
Yeah. And you 5 years ago, a year ago, would be so stoked to be where you're at and doing what you're doing. And
Exactly.
I love being able to take that step back. Yeah, it is so important. And it's really hard to do sometimes. It feels like your feet are glued to the ground wherever you are in that moment. But yeah, okay. So man, we got a lot to talk about. I would first love to dig into, how you started finding your way into voice work and vocology, because, we connected through, social media and through like the shared connection of Texas State, and you had done a class with Caitlin Hopkins, the head of the musical theater program down there, and I took a voice lesson with you, and we chatted about back injuries and stuff like that. We can dive into that stuff too, and I really love the way that you approach singing training, at least for me, for somebody who's really, really insecure about their singing voice, and who uses their voice every day for their job. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what attracted you to the voice and to helping people find confidence, and your specific methodology of teaching and coaching.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story in the sense that it came later on in my career, to date anyway. I started really in the arts and creative sector, I guess, when I was a kid playing piano. Like, my parents said, what activities would you be interested in? And they tried a few things and then hit on piano. And that was something that actually initially I stepped back from. I was not interested in it. Then when I got with a different teacher, that changed a lot. And then I just kept going from there. And parallel to that, I really got into sort of the dance world. And that was where I spent a lot of my growing up time, was in the dance studio. I was very fortunate to have parents who were incredibly supportive and would go out of their way to do things like take my sister and I to New York so I could study dance there in the summers and things like that. And really wonderful support and encouragement from my family. And so I would do a lot of choreography when I was in undergrad. I would choreograph for various high schools and various different productions in the area as a way to sort of make money while I was doing school. But I was in school for music theory. So I got my bachelor's degree in music theory, where I was a piano principal. So I was accompanying a lot of vocalists, but in no way was I sort of into the voice world at that point. Mm-hmm. And I went to Florida State, got a master's degree in music theory. And while I was there, Florida State has a huge musical theater program.
Yeah.
So what I did a lot of was accompanying the musical theater studio students at FSU while I was there. And during that time, I really got into doing a lot of coaching for musical theater. And I think a lot of folks may not necessarily, if they've never done singing training, may not make the distinction between coaching and sort of the singing training world. So as a coach, you really work with people. Usually coaches are pretty good pianists, and they sort of help people act a song or engage with a song in a certain way. They might help them find repertoire. Whereas singing teachers tend to be people who are really training the voice from a physiological perspective, expanding range and the technical things. And if there is any question about a potential voice pathology or things, that tends to be the domain there. So I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was totally doing the coaching work. And I moved to Austin in 2005 and was in grad school again at UT. And during that time, I enrolled in a vocal pedagogy course. And it was really just because it sounded interesting. And I met Darlene Wiley, who is still a good friend. And Darlene was teaching that course. And it was very classically oriented. But because of my background with musical theater coaching, she had asked me to sort of lead a few of the classes in strategies for teaching musical theater voice.
Cool.
And through that year of doing that, I really got into coaching musical theater. I had a couple of people at UT come up to me and say, do you teach musical theater voice? And I said, no, not really. And they said, we think you should, and we'd like to study with you. And so fast forward to these years later, I always had a sort of a scientific bent with regards to things like the voice. And so a pandemic project sort of was that I finally enrolled in this fairly new program at Lamar University, graduate program that was a vocology certification. So a lot about very objective measurements of the voice, acoustics, auditory perception, voice science. And so finished that program up about 8 months or so ago, and then sat for the exam and the portfolio to become a recognized vocologist by PAVA, which is the professional organization of vocology.
Wow. That's so much. That's so cool. It's such a wonderful blend of science and art all in one in this one little area. Well, I guess it's really like this whole area, but it's
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's really from your pelvic floor all the way to the tip of your head. So,
well, you know all about those things. And I think that, the thing is that I am always about, because I really only coach and teach and train in the contemporary commercial music realm, which includes things like musical theater, which is sort of my bread and butter, but also pop, rock, folk, things that aren't really part of the classical world. And I think that because there is so much high octane demand, both in terms of people's performing schedules in this contemporary commercial world, but also just in terms of the notes and the tessitura and all these things that are required.
The vocal gymnastics that commercial music demands of people.
Absolutely. And so I think it's important. I don't think that every singing teacher needs to be as equipped with a vocal science and all of these measurements and instrumentation and all of these things necessarily. But I do think it's important to have a few people in sort of each city or region, of the country that are available to do that, because we often will then get referrals to work with those people specifically. And so that's what I think is important. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of the sustainability of the voice and the vocal gymnastics and everything and the high demands on commercial performers and singers, Jess, my wife, went to Harry Styles at the Moody Center last week, and we love his music, and he's obviously like an incredible performer. But she said she came back from that with the biggest takeaway of I have a whole new respect for how he planned out that show vocally. Just because Jess is an amazing singer as well. And she's like, I just the whole time was obsessed with how he planned out each song to get to the hard stuff last, and how he navigated that, and how he kind of trailed off when he needed to pump the brakes a little bit, I just can't even imagine. I mean, I can't imagine in some ways of singing shows eight times a week, but doing a show like that, it's important to have people like you around that can help educate people on how their instrument works. It's just like knowing how a car works, how to fix a car and how it runs most efficiently. You need to know all of the moving parts, and the voice and the throat and the face have a surprising amount of moving parts.
Oh, so many. And the thing is, it's you alluded to this just now. I always say, because people will ask me to come and perform as a vocalist, and I am not a performer as a vocalist by any means. I'm a pianist, first and foremost. But I do say, because then people will say, well, how do you teach voice then? And I do think in my case, it is very much, I use the exact analogy you just used, which is being a mechanic for the voice. And I don't think you have to be the car in order to work with the car.
Yeah. You can be the head of the pit crew and just, Exactly. I think that's a really awesome, I love how you said that. How we teamed up to form that beautiful analogy, especially with the oncoming of the Grand Prix at Coda at the end of the month.
Exactly right. Timely. Sponsor.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Coda, please sponsor us. F1 sponsor us. I'll represent any team you want. Just get me to the racetrack. Adam and I will show up.
That's right. People be very confused that we're talking all about the voice, but whatever.
Yes. We'll incorporate it. I'll sing the national anthem, and Adam will accompany me.
That's right.
So with all of the different methodologies of teaching out there. And like, I know I, as a singer, and hopefully anybody out there who has been in a similar situation of, everybody's born with a voice. Everybody's born with some kind of instrument. And I am of the mindset that anybody really can learn how to sing and sing well. Some people are born with a natural affliction, I guess, to it. And like, my wife is one of those people who is just, singing is like walking for her. It is so effortless. She works hard at it to do a good job. Where somebody like me, I've really had a hard time finding that confidence and finding that vocal agility and finding whatever my real singing voice is, and finding a foothold in being able to get up and sing in front of people, even when I was doing it as a job. So part of that journey that I found difficult was finding a teacher and a methodology that I really gelled with. And so when we had Michael Maresca come into Texas State and do One Voice, I was like, oh, fuck yeah, this is like, you're not trying to make me sound like somebody else. I had a voice teacher there that in the opera program who was really like, I started picking up on what she was putting down in terms of trying to manipulate my voice to sound like somebody else that I wasn't. And so I did like a Nathan Gunn impersonation. And for people who don't know Nathan Gunn, he's a world famous baritone in the opera world. And as soon as I did that, she was like, yes, that's exactly what you should be doing. And I said, great, cool. I'm not coming back again. Thank you very much. So how do you, I guess, like, how do you pair with students who have had one methodology for a long time? And what do you recommend to people to finding, like, the most important things that a teacher should offer? A teacher and not a coach. Because I feel like if you've got a great teacher, it allows you to develop the vocabulary and the muscle memory in your instrument to translate what a coach is saying that they want you to do or want you to achieve in a healthy way. But for you, what are the key benchmarks of a great vocal teacher, voice teacher?
Yeah, so I think one of them, in my opinion, is that they still maintain a certain amount of beginner students in their studio. To me, it doesn't matter if you are working with the highest elite of the industry. I think it's very important that folks are still training at least a small percentage even of beginning level students, or if they don't have individual students in their studio, that they are going out and working in the community with beginning level students. Because I think that what happens is it gets so easy to take for granted so many things that perhaps a very advanced singer or an elite singer who is really doing this as their career, it can be very easy to take for granted things that those people are doing. But to be in service to the folks who have had more training, it's important not to be taking those things for granted and to sort of step back and look at our own biases as trainers. And I think the best way to do that is to continue to be working, at least to some extent, with some absolute beginners. So for me, it is very important that I'm always working as part of my schedule with absolute beginners, because that is where you're not going to be taking things for granted, because that's where, 75% of all of this of training to be a trainer comes into place, is when you're working with folks who are beginners. And I think that is really important. I also think that if you have worked with a system, like you mentioned, Michael Maresca and One Voice, anything like, that's an example, or Fitzmaurice technique or Alexander technique, which aren't necessarily only voice specific, but, any number of Kristen Linkletter, Patsy Rodenberg, any number of people that we could spout out right now. Estel, if you have worked in one of those techniques and you have found amazing success and you feel that that really works for you, then I think seeking out someone who specializes in that is a great thing to do. I do not specialize, and I like to incorporate a lot from each of those things, particularly the Alexander technique, but I do not specialize in any one of those things. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, Estel has been amazing for me in the past, I really want to continue with that, I'm going to refer them then to an Estel practitioner. And so I think that is something that is really important, is to know if you're looking for one methodology, or if you're looking for maybe a smattering of things. I always say, for me, my goal is to help someone put all the pieces together. So if they bring in their whole wardrobe of what they've trained with other people, we're going to like kind of, maybe this is because of the brander in me, the branding person, but we're going to kind of create the cohesive looks for the shoots, right? And so that's my approach to those sorts of things. And frankly, I also think that a lot of the fundamental things that we're going to work to train in almost any person, holding the breath. So many people hold the breath. So many of these things are just consistent, constant things that I find myself sort of saying and coaching on the same, things 60% of my day, no matter who the individual is. It may be a different manifestation in each individual, but I think that you want to be with someone who has a baseline understanding, at least, of the anatomy of the voice and of knowing when it's time to refer out to somebody else. I also think it is really important to interview a potential voice coach or trainer to ask them if they, and this is a tricky question to ask, so maybe it's figuring out how to ask this, or maybe it's asking their other students. But I think it's really important that person is not inherently bashing any style of singing as inherently bad.
Yes. Oh, I love that you said that.
So, and I know I probably, even though I came totally from classical training as a music theorist, I went to school for 8 years and all we did was classical music pretty much. I'm sure I have fallen guilty to having a bias against classical singing at times. I absolutely in no way think that classical singing is fundamental to singing in other styles, or classical training, I should say. Yeah. Whereas I might think like ballet, if you're going to be a musical theater performer, if you're going to do more Western sort of forms of dance, I do think ballet is an important foundation for a lot of those other things. I do not think that analogy carries over for the voice.
Like if you want to be a successful vocalist, you don't have to have had years and years of classical training on with your voice. If you do have that, great, then that is a foundation to start from, and a wonderful one at that. But it doesn't mean that you should feel deterred from training your voice if you haven't already had that.
In no way. And I think that thankfully it's becoming much more an old school thing that this happens, but you still do occasionally hear somebody who comes in and has worked with a classical pedagogue who has told them that just point blank, singing musical theater is unhealthy. And that is just factually inaccurate.
I love with the dawn of TikTok, all of these voice teachers and coaches that have come up. There's some really fantastic people that I really enjoy, like seeing their breakdown of things and just how much they love singing and love the human voice. And then there are some who are just like, you can't do this. You shouldn't do that. This is shit for your voice and it's shit for your career. You'll never survive. You'll never work. I'm like, okay, that's a little dated. That's a hugely dated mindset. And you just, like you said, you got to find the things that work from all of the different parts of your experience as a vocalist, and you as the teacher. I love that you are piecing those puzzles together. I think you do that beautifully, at least with me and my complicated background and relationship with my voice. And Michael Maresca does that beautifully. And the only other voice teacher I've had that I really, really love in like from college on, Mike Ruckles is somebody in New York who I feel like does a really great job of that. And like you is really on that scientific side of things
Mike
as
is
well.
Very in that scientific vein. Yep.
Yeah. And it's just, the three of y'all have really, even though I struggle with my voice, I feel like each of y'all have helped me bring out a side of my voice that has at least given me confidence in the moment to do that and be like, okay, cool. Like I am not just a dumpster fire singer. Like I tell myself, but it's just a matter of, like I tell people with voiceover and how to do a bunch of different voices for hours on end. It's just practice. It's working out a muscle and it's failing forward on a regular basis.
And I also think, and I was just saying this to a voice class of actors, speaking voice class the other night, I also think that we, for some weird reason, and I'm not sure why this is, because I don't think it happens in a lot of other arenas of activity, but with the singing voice in particular, it's almost like, well, if I am not Beyonce, Whitney, Celine, whoever else, right, then I'm like automatically a zero.
Yeah, and it's not worth it.
No, people, yeah, and that's ridiculous, I think. And I understand why people feel that way because it's kind of a pervasive mindset, I think. But, that wouldn't stop you if you said, well, I'm not, one of these NBA players. That doesn't stop you from going and playing basketball on a league or pursuing the pursuit of being an NBA player or whatever, right? You still would go play basketball, but people will not sing frequently because they feel like that's the only valid way to sing is like those people I just mentioned, right? And those people are outliers. I think that's very important to remember. It's not that you cannot reach those places because there are many, many, many Whitney's, Celine's, Beyonce's that we just have never heard from. So it is possible to get to those places, but you have to remember that, like, even when you reach that place, that is a small percentage of people, and you should not negate the use of your voice just because of that sort of like mythos that's out there, right?
Yeah. I know personally I have like gone out and I feel like I'm a strong actor, strong dancer when I was able to before my back stuff got bad enough that I had to stop, and like an okay singer. I'd gotten great feedback on it, but because I was comparing myself not even to like the pop stars, but just the people in my industry or friends that I had that I really admired the way that they could sing and how beautiful their voice was. And I because I didn't sound like that, I consistently put my foot in my mouth, and anxiety took over, and it would completely crash my auditions and crash some opportunities. And I just could not get over that hump. And so why do you feel that singing is such a vulnerable experience? Because I will say, like, I have ideas for silly videos and stuff like that. I want to like put out some Nightmare Before Christmas stuff, and I'll sing in my studio alone and do it and have a blast and be like, oh, that sounded fine. But then time comes to like doing it in front of people or in front of a camera to put out, and I'm like, I just want to throw up all over the place.
I think that one huge thing that I learned when I really started, because like I said, I think it's very valuable to continue to work to some percentage with beginning students. So I was teaching a beginning voice class, like kind of absolute beginners many years ago. And I started to realize when I would teach this class over and over that there was a massively recurring narrative that I would never have really thought about otherwise. Again, taking this for granted, which is that so many people have been told that they have a terrible voice and should not sing. And that has, in many cases, comes from parents. Probably that's the biggest culprit is parents, at least in terms of the stories that have been told to me. It often comes from maybe siblings, friends, and the crazy
social media.
Thing,
have you heard too? Like
social media,
yeah,
absolutely. And the crazy thing is that these people almost always come in and have these incredible voices. I remember one student in particular, I don't think I'll ever forget her, from all these years ago. And she came into this class and she was terrified to sing in front of people. And her voice was glorious. I mean, just incredible. I mean, she could have been training for 8 or 10 years to where she was just starting. And I said, just out of curiosity, I mean, maybe it wasn't your desire to do this as a career or whatever, but why have you never pursued this? Because your voice is like glorious. And she said, oh, my parents always told me as a kid that I had a terrible voice. And that stays with people. And her parents were clearly wrong. And perhaps that was just because they didn't want to hear her at the time. She was, loud, whatever, I don't know. Or they just were incorrect. But I think that so many people have heard that. And I also think that, it's a pretty well documented statistic that in the United States, at least, that public speaking is the number one fear. That eclipses death as a fear in the United States. And so I think things with the voice, if public speaking is that way, where we're not even holding out notes, right? When you start to hold out notes and then there is this fear of like your voice cracking or losing control or running out of breath, all these things, it becomes a snowball because, of course, when the anxiety kicks in, that's all the things that are going to happen. You're going to lose control more because you're hyperventilating or your breath is not under control or you're tightening. So all of the anxiety mechanisms physically are things that we try to eradicate in singing performance. So I think that loop is so frequently in people's heads. Like, why would I be doing this? Why would anybody want to listen to me? Somebody told me I sucked as a vocalist. All of these things. It's amazing that people ever do feel super confident, I think, when they get up there to do this, because it's kind
so
of a little
impressive.
bit of a Soleil thing, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's magnetic, and that's why the people who are doing it on a regular basis and who are successful because it's a magnetic thing of like, wow, I wish I could do that. What does that feel like? That was a constant thought in my head going through musical theater program is, what does that feel like to have a voice like that? What does it feel like to like feel those physical sensations and those vibrations of being a good singer? And I want to be very clear. My parents never told me that I did not have a good voice. They were like your parents, incredibly supportive and everything. And but it's all for the most part my own doing. But that's interesting with that correlation between public speaking and singing and those coping mechanisms that kick in of not breathing. I find myself doing it sometimes, even like if I'm teaching a class to college students. If I'm like not completely on my game, or I feel like I start to second guess myself, my voice starts to tighten up and I start to like drop back here, and it's just more of like this instead of like really breathing and using everything at my disposal. Yes,
absolutely. And I think also, particularly in contemporary commercial fields, there is this objective reality that there are certain notes that if you cannot hit these certain notes, you are not likely to be competitive in XYZ field, say Broadway, right?
Oh, God, How many times did I hear that if I didn't have an A by the time I graduated, I wouldn't work? And that stuck so hard.
Well, and that's one of those things that there is, this is hard because there is a little bit of a truth to that. There is a reality in that. And I think that that's where the Venn diagram crosses over between sort of anxiety and then also reality of the profession. But I think that is something that can be mitigated. When you get, in my mind, when you're in a university situation, we all know universities are massively bureaucratic and not the sort of Pollyanna places that we would hope they would be for training. But I think that you have 4 years to train. 4 years is a long time for someone who has already been accepted into a program that thus has demonstrated in the competitive world of musical theater programs these days, hopefully a very baseline foundational level of already having achieved like some kind of level
of
vocal
competence. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, for me, that's a long time for somebody to train. And again, that doesn't mean that you get to work one-on-one with somebody all those 4 years or anything like that. But I do think it is in some ways incumbent on these universities to really be able to recruit people who are experts as voice trainers who really will be vocationally focused. Because I think a lot of what I have seen, and I have many friends who are colleagues who are amazing and teach in universities. I'm not in any way downing that situation, but I have seen a lot of folks who have been so craft focused as opposed to vocationally focused, who perhaps have fallen out of step with what the industry is currently doing and wanting. And you could argue that, when you go to college, you're like learning craft or whatever. But when you're, in electrical engineering, when you leave, you better have these skills to be an electrical engineer.
You got to be able to go out and work.
And that's the thing. And I think that that's really important. And if a individual school is very heavy on craft and not necessarily on, and I use that word craft as in like sort of tradition and like, and really looking
process
at these things
and
like art with a capital A. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Then I think it's incumbent on them to be straightforward about that with people who are auditioning, because the vast majority of 18-year-olds who are auditioning for these programs are assuming they're getting vocational training, not sort of like process craft training. And I think it's not right to withhold that stance and philosophy and process when that is your philosophy as a school and a program. So I think that that's part of all of that as well.
Yeah, I love that separation of craft and vocation. That's gonna stick with me for a little bit.
They can go together,
cool
but you
see.
can't sacrifice.
Yeah, you can't sacrifice vocation for the craft. I mean, in some instances you can, right? It's like if you've got the time built in to, like 4 years is, like you said, a lot of time. So you have that time to like kind of break things down into the what is the foundation of the craft first, and how to stay curious in developing the craft, but then also translate it to vocation. So I'm going to ponder on that for a minute. That's awesome.
And that I'm sure there's plenty of people that would argue with me on that, and that is great.
Yeah. No, and that's the other thing too that's so interesting in this vocation of voice work, whether it's what I'm doing more often, which is voiceover, or singing in musical theater, and still being so close to that world, is all of these like super like black and white opinions on like we've already touched on a little bit of like, you can do this, you can't do that, and be successful. But that, like I said, it's what I appreciate about you, Michael Maresca and Mike Ruckles, is that it's just like, let's just take what your journey has been so far and translate it into something improved.
Well, thank you. And I want to ask you, how did you get into voiceover specifically? Because you have a musical theater degree, right?
Yep.
So how did you get into voiceover?
So I grew up doing silly voices and making people laugh, and got addicted to that first.
Yeah.
And
of course.
In college, I kind of let that go because I was so solely focused on that vocation of musical theater and the craft of like, I need to figure out who I am as an artist and who I am, like all the crunchy granola stuff that you go through, or that I feel like a lot of people go through in college. And I'd kind of forgotten about, I'd let the voices kind of drop and didn't really know that voiceover was like a really sustainable career. And then in New York in like 2017, had several people in the course of like a month come up to me and say, hey, you should really start looking into voiceover. Like you do these voices and you're funny and you improv and do this stuff. So just be curious about it. I was like, okay. So I took a class with a casting director for 5 weeks, and Andy Roth in New York, he casts a bunch of stuff and is an awesome teacher, and just broke it down, really made it accessible and fun. And he's like, this is a fun job. It should be fun. It should be easy. So just do that. And so I took his class and totally got hooked. And then, like I've mentioned with my back issues, and like we've had a long conversation about, those eventually prevented me medically from being able to do, physically from being able to do theater and any other kind of like live performance work for a while. And so when that happened, I took a couple days to freak out about it, and then just threw my energy into voiceover. And it's been a wonderful journey thus far. And it honestly has been, I think there was, for me in singing, and we've spoken about this before, and people listening to this may know this or may not, but I always had a complicated relationship with it. I still do, because I love it so much. And it is this wonderful physical sensation and the storytelling sensation that I feel very connected to, but that I'm also really afraid of and feel a lot of resistance and a huge lack of confidence with, because it is that vulnerable feeling of, I think I got to a point where I just was so afraid of it, I stopped doing it for long enough for me to kind of have some rust develop on those skills. But through doing voiceover, and really, especially in the times where I'm busy with it, it reminds me a lot of the training that I went through with singing. And it makes me want to sing again, because it's fun and it's low stakes, and it's not like I need to sing well so that I can make $300 a week at a regional theater. It's now I'm like, okay, cool. I found a way to sustainably support myself creatively. Now what else? What else is going to scare me into a place of growth? And singing is one of those things.
I love it. And I do think it's, it is very tricky, even for people who who are quite confident in their voice to go and stand in the middle of Ripley Greer or Pearl or 42nd Street Studios or whatever.
Or Adele in front of millions of people. Like, I love when she was like, I have stage fright, singing in front of people scares the shit out of me. I was like, I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about it. And I was like, oh my God.
Absolutely. And, Donny Osmond, who sort of famously performed forever and ever and ever and ever, and without incident. And then when he did the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat tour, they actually had to cancel several of the performances because he developed this debilitating stage fright. And so it doesn't mean that it has to happen, early on and then you, quote, get over it. I mean, you can be someone who's performed forever, never had that feeling, and then one day it's incapacitating. And so I think that's important for people to remember too. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you all of a sudden, right? Mm-hmm. It can happen seemingly out of nowhere and after you've had a long amount of really confident and acclaimed sort of singing career, right?
Yeah. And it's not going to be that way forever too, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and and the flip side of the coin is that if you don't, it is okay if you don't want to perform anymore. You have permission to not do that and to just do it for yourself, or to just be like, that was a wonderful chapter of my life. It's not doing for me what it was before. It doesn't serve me anymore. And I'm going to move on.
Some of my friends who are the most incredible musicians I've ever met either decided early on that they weren't going to pursue it professionally, or, did it for a bit and then decided that wasn't going to be the rest of their life and career. And some of the people I know who are the absolute happiest when it comes to singing in their voice are avocational singers. So again, I don't think that to be a good singer, you must do it professionally. Like, there are all of these myths that are out there. And thankfully, funnily enough, as the science develops, they're starting to get broken down, and we can cite studies and research and things that make things not so opinion based, right? And I think that that's an important correlation too. Yeah.
Oh God, I feel like we could talk about this forever.
I know, right?
So, yeah, this is what happened when we went out for lunch. We were like, oh shit, it's been 2.5 hours. Okay, so I would love to hear kind of your journey with creative entrepreneurship, because that is something that I felt we really connected on when we chatted. Was this, the notion of being a starving artist is a long dying trope, and that there's really, especially with all the access that we have to a camera in our phone or the internet, and just being able to be self-reliant in building a business, or in your case, several businesses, to serve your creative spirit and serve your community. When did you realize, or was this something that you were always kind of born with in terms of this entrepreneurial side of your brain, that you were like, oh, cool. Like, I want to jump into this, and I want to build an actual business, whether that's with Tilt or Resolution. And I'd love to hear too, specifically with Resolution, what that process was like, and how you just figured it out, and what you wish you would have known ahead of time.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, because when I started out, I only ever wanted to work for other people. I never wanted to have a business. And, the rest of my family are all morticians. Everybody in the rest of my family, morticians. And they own a funeral home right outside of Pittsburgh. And I grew up around all of that all the time. And my parents were very specific with my sister and I, saying, if this is not what you want to do, I mean, yes, it's been in the family, whatever, but if this is not what you want to do, you should not do it. You should do what you want to do. So I went a different way. But actually, one of the primary reasons I went a different way was because I didn't want to own a business.
Yeah.
So
look at you now.
And I will say that I think that there are many ways, and I think people know this now, that it's kind of a new thing to think about, but there are many ways to be entrepreneurial without owning a business. I mean, aside from Resolution Creative, the other endeavors that I have really are primarily nonprofit focused, in the sense that, like, Tilt is a nonprofit. I do not own Tilt. But I was one of the 3 co-founders and am still the producing artistic director, right? So So in terms of like actually owning a business, aside from being a sole proprietor, where you might do a one-off voice coaching or something like that, because even the voice coaching that I do is through other entities, right?
Yeah.
For 99% of the time, which is by choice. But the Resolution Creative started because, my business partner, Dave, who I mentioned before, is just this really, I think, fantastic photographer, videographer. And he also is young enough to actually have a degree in social media strategy. That's what Dave's degree is in, right?
Wow.
And so he was one of the very first people to to have that kind of degree actually from school. And so what happened was we were in New York and Dave was there kind of shooting a few friends of mine for, artists and people like that for his own portfolio as a photographer. And one of my friends, who's a former Broadway performer and now a writer, he said to us that day after we were, because I got very involved. It's hard for me just to stand back and be like, right? So I got very involved in the coaching of all of this and very much the why of all of it, because this is the reason that the business started, really. I started asking so many questions about the purpose of these photographs and the sort of because brand really can come a lot back to mission and vision and values. And that can be something that individuals should discern for themselves, not just corporations and companies and nonprofits. And my friend had said at the end of this 3 hours where Dave was shooting him for his own portfolio, he said, you all should start a business because, I just paid for like 6 months of career counseling. And in this 3 hours, just the questions you asked me to discern how to shoot photos of me feels like 3 times what I got out of that 6 months of career coaching.
Yeah.
And so Dave and I said, okay, well, so and we were getting some of this feedback from other people too, similar kinds of things. And so we said, okay, there's clearly something we're doing that's different here. And a lot of it is because we are asking some hard questions that bring mission, vision, and values into the individual sphere. Mm-hmm. And we also both really, really, really believe that, we both really kind of think social media is primarily a gross place, even though we have a social media company.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil.
Yes. And we think that you can be authentic on social as an artist and creative and still achieve the actual objective goals that you're going for. It is a process. And so we actually developed an online course that takes people through in 20 modules. So it's involved, and people have looked at the workbook and said, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can commit to this, but that's what it takes to do this authentically. And so we developed this online course so that people can, on their own, because, of course, consulting and doing your assets and things as a whole package can get quite expensive. Yep. And we wanted to offer something. Access is important to us both as well. And we wanted to offer something that was accessible where you could kind of DIY it if you put in the time and the discipline. And it's kind of what, we would do as consultants and coaches. But if you can do it on your own, we wanted to have that version for people. And so it's coming back to that why. And many photographers, you sort of get in there and you know what these are going to be used for. Are these going to be used for shoots that are model test shots, or are these going to be for headshots, or what are they for? But when you're doing branded work, you really don't necessarily have that clear cut of a use for these assets a lot of the time. And so that's where we kind of come in. And we also do work for companies and productions, and we do promotional trailers and all kinds of things like that. But the reason we started the company was because we kind of saw that other people weren't really doing this and that it was really catching on. People were asking to work with us as individuals. So we said, well, we should start a company and really get it forward facing out there into the world. And that's what we did. It was established January 2020, an ominous date.
What wonderful timing.
I know, right? But thankfully has just really continued to be, again, we're very grateful. It's continued to be quite successful, and we've grown quite a bit in what it is that we're doing. So that's sort of the reason that became the business that we own together, and, made sense to have in that way.
Yeah. And it's so cool. And I love that you said too, like, being entrepreneurial doesn't mean you have to start a business. And I think for a long time for me that I was like, I'm not a business owner. Like, I know in school we're told like we are our business and we are our own product that we are selling. And it's one thing to hear that and be like, yeah, that's sweet. And I, like you, did not really think about owning a business. Like, I was never the person in high school who was like reselling on eBay or like always hustling on the side with something. To be completely transparent, like, I wanted to go to New York. I wanted an agent to find me work, and I wanted, like, I'm always proactive in what I'm doing, but I would love to have somebody that is going out on my behalf and getting me in these rooms so that I can do what I feel like I do best. But then when that wasn't happening, and you find different ways to do that, and especially with voiceover, and that's what I've loved about it so much, is that I feel like I've got agency again over my own marketing and it's been this whole process of discovering a brand and like finding out like, oh, this is kind of fun to be entrepreneurial, and it doesn't have to look the same for me as it does for somebody who is selling a blog for $10 million, but to just listen to that little voice in the back of your head. Yeah. Go get what you want, and go, like, if somebody's asking you to do something, go try it, have fun with it. And if it's fun and you're vibing with it and you get that feedback, like what y'all got, then take the next step and do another session or do another shoot and then turn it into a business if you feel like it. But that's really, really cool. And I love that you're serving the community in that way too, of like helping people with navigating this ever-changing landscape of social media. And it's, y'all do it on a whole nother level than what I do. And mine is just kind of telling people to like cut the shit out and realize that like you should just make something and put it on social media. You have a killer camera on your phone and just do it. And then y'all taking that to the next step of being like, okay, so let's fill in that ever important question of why.
Yeah. And I really think that, people are very hesitant as artists, artists and creatives and it's, we really say what we do is digital, because we certainly do websites. We certainly do, other digital kinds of material. But from a social media perspective, I think that a lot of people are just so afraid of commodifying themselves and sort of selling something or being inauthentic or not having the time to devote to it or the desire to be doing certain things and putting themselves out there in a certain way. And we work, just like I do as a voice trainer, we work with people where they are, and we say, okay, well, how much time do you have? Well, let's plan for that, as opposed to saying you must do this and this and this, or you will not be successful, because just like in the voice world, that is not true. Yeah. There are some musts, but there are a few. Not everything is a must or must not. Yeah. And I don't think so far we've worked with a client who has just said, oh, I just can't do it. Right. Yeah. There have been a couple people who have been, I think, what's the word that I want to use? Intimidated maybe a little bit just by the scope of the workbook for our course. Yeah. But we tell people you can work through it at your own pace, and get something written down for your why. Your why can change in a week. Yeah. But get something written down now and proceed to the next page, right? Don't spend too much time. You got to get going. When you wait for the muse or you wait for perfection, you will not create. Yep. You will die waiting. Yeah. I had to say that to myself at the beginning of this year. It was like, I just am consuming other people's work all the time. I say I'm a creative person, but what do I have to show for it? And it really wasn't much. And so I was like, I'm going to start. And the why was because I felt like I had to, because I felt like my soul was empty in terms of creativity and work. And I felt awful about myself. I was like, I'm not connecting with people. I'm not like, it was a bunch of different reasons, but the main why was because I was like, I'm a creative person. I need to create something. And so
Just start making stupid videos, or just start talking about stuff that you know about. Make it shitty and refine.
Well, the thing is, social media and digital media, but social media specifically, is a stage that is available to the majority of people, right? And so it is a place where you can create your own stage, your own set, whatever, and you can be the producer and do what you want. And that's what we talk with people all the time. How is this your second stage? Not marketing for your primary thing, but the thing, right? Manifest in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's how you want to think about it as a creative and as an artist. This is what I am and do manifest in this medium, not this is me marketing the actual thing I do. Right.
Yeah.
And it's available. You know, you don't have to have crazy amounts of money to make social media worthwhile in your budget.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to have any money at that. Spend any money on social media right off the bat.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, okay. So with Tilt then, now shifting gears, how did that come about? Because this is a really special thing that you do, and I think it's so cool. And I would just love to hear how you got started in this, how this idea, the genesis of this idea.
So I have a vision disorder that is progressive, and it's an optic nerve atrophy specific to my optic nerves. And it's fairly rare. I mean, I think it's very rare. I had to go to many high-profile hospitals before I could get diagnosed as a kid with what was going on. And then I saw Lisa Leistad, who was just this incredible, and I think she's only doing research now, I believe, maybe even retired. But she was still practicing at the time, and she was with the Cleveland Clinic. And so she was a neuro-ophthalmologist, and she, within about 5 minutes, was like, this is what's happening. It's this rare thing called optic nerve atrophy. And so the little fibers in each optic nerve die over time. I had never considered myself a person with a disability because I was still, up until I was 22 or 23, I was still able to drive and able to do pretty much everything in my life. When I stopped being able to drive, which was right when I moved to Austin, because I lost some of my depth perception. And that's the thing about this disorder, is that it's not predictable. Like what some people lose, this thing or whatever. And I started to lose a little bit of my depth perception. And I realized it was harder to tell how close I was to things than I would feel comfortable with. So I stopped driving, and, I started to think about when I was also very inspired by the Deaf West Broadway production of Big River that had been done. Oh my gosh, it's been so many years now. It's probably 25 years ago or more. But it was so amazing, and it really opened up more to me about what theater could do. So I think those two things together really made me think, when I get to a place in my career where I'm really established, I would love to pursue maybe finding a disability theater company that's already in existence to work with in some way, whatever that would be. So when that time happened, I reached out to a friend of mine who has a son with a rare disability, and she was very connected to the disability world here in Austin and also to the theater world. And I said, would you be interested in talking about something along these lines? And she said, I just really don't have the time. It's not the time in my life right now. And that was the end of that conversation. Fast forward 2 years, I get this random email from this woman named Gail Dalrymple, who was a good friend of this friend that I just mentioned. And she said, I'm really looking to start a theater company for actors with disabilities. My son, Peter, is about to matriculate out of the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired at maybe 24 or 25 years old. And I have realized that Peter has relatively little socialization or social opportunities, I guess, outside of theater. And so I'm just now realizing this. And what is he going to do when there's no theater in his life when he graduates? And Peter had a very special relationship and has a very special relationship with the person who was the head at the time of the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired Theater Department, whose name is Robert Pearson. So Gail had already had Robert on board, and she said, I would love for you to meet with us because this other friend of mine had really said that I would be a good person to work with and whatever. So we got together and we said, okay, what is this going to be? And TILT actually doesn't stand for anything. I've thought about many times since creating like an acronym.
What that acronym is.
But what it is it's about tilting perspectives, right? And seeing things, or not even seeing, because we have a lot of visually impaired and blind actors, experiencing the world on a tilt. And so Tilt Performance Group was born, and that was 10 years ago, almost now 9 years ago. And through that time, I am the only one of the co-founders who is still with the organization. But we now have, I'm now salaried. We have a salaried executive director. And so it has really come to a place that is something that we're all very proud of. In about 3 weeks, we're going to premiere a new version of a musical that my friend Andrea Grody wrote. Andrea was the musical director for The Band's Visit on Broadway, Tootsie on Broadway. And so, we're now at the point where Tilt can sort of premiere a rewrite of a work by a Broadway musical director. And so that's something that really we have come a very long way from being what was in essence sort of an after-school devising program initially, where we would meet very sporadically. And, I think our first season we did maybe one show in that year. And that was it. That was all we did, right? And now we have a way for tilters, as they're called, our actors, to have a touch point with us almost every single day of the week through Tilt U, which is our education arm that was born during the pandemic. So it's a something that I am very proud of, and I'm also very proud that we've kind of become a company that people look to throughout the country for like practices and strategy and consulting. We've been doing a lot of that kind of work, so we've built up that presence, and it's something that's very special to me. We at the moment, we probably have about 20 company members. We're looking to grow that as we're able to now be more virtual as well, and thus more accessible, which is something that's very important to us. But our mission is to shatter disability stereotypes through inclusive theater. And that's our North Star for everything we're doing. And we do 3 to 4 productions a year, typically. And Tilt U, that education branch, I'm gonna have to talk to you about doing a voiceover class. They would love that.
That would be so fun. Yeah, absolutely down.
So it's a really special thing. And tiltperformance.org for anyone who's interested. And I'll also say, again, talking about anxiety, I hope that anyone out there who may know someone with a disability who might be interested in what we do, or someone who's listening with a disability who might be interested in what we do, it is a very, very low barrier audition process. And we have very few sort of requirements for being a Tilt company member in terms of, commitment or amount that someone's able to be with us. So I hope that you will check us out if you're listening to this and hear it, because we really want to be open and accessible to a very wide range of performers and writers and authors and composers with disabilities.
What a special, sacred place that you've created. That is so, it's amazing, Adam. It's so freaking cool for lack of many better words, but.
Well, I really have to say, I know we're running out of time, but I really have to say that, I think I have sort of continued it on, and certainly our executive director, Amy Tarver, who literally we hired 3 days before the lockdown for the pandemic, is so responsible for the fact that we're even still here these 2 or 3 years later. But without Gail, and I learned so much about, again, because I never really had identified as a person with a disability for whatever reason, I had not been very ensconced in the disability world. And so I would never have been able to continue working with Tilt on my own without the just vast knowledge and network and example of Gail and Robert. the two co-founders. They really were the ones who were instrumental in getting this going, because they were the ones I learned pretty much everything from. Before then, I started learning it from all of our company members and the organizations I became part of, and so they were the foundation of all of it.
It's awesome. And so for people listening, and I'm going to post all the links that to everything that we've spoken about and everything that you sent me in the episode description. So if you're listening and you're curious, check it out wherever you're listening, and you'll be able to have a direct link to everything that Adam's doing. For Tilt specifically, I know you said that composers, directors, is it anything in the theater realm, musical theater realm, that you are interested in? Shop work, lighting, is it everything and anything, or is it more performance geared?
That's a great question. So we would love at some point to be able to do, and during the pandemic, we did have a class that we offered where somebody, we kind of delivered these kits to people, and they were to the actors, and they were able then to build props and learn about how props are built and learn how some things work and sound and things like that virtually. But because we don't necessarily always perform in the same location, it's a little trickier for us to have consistency in equipment that is in a place that's just kind of lights that are already hung in the air, or sound that's already installed in the place that just lives there, in order to really be able to have folks who do that. We do have our first, on this production we're working on right now, our first company member who has ever been a stage manager for a production.
Oh, cool.
So we're doing that kind of thing, but really it's pretty performance geared. But if someone is like, I write plays, or I write poetry, or I write creative writing, and I am not really interested in performing, perfectly great. We'd love to have you. It's all kind of performance geared or creation geared. We would love at some point to get to bring in some more tech to what we do. But we're focused right now on those things, but it does not mean that someone has to feel like they want to perform if they have another way they would like to contribute. Awesome. And we don't only in fact, we frequently don't do musicals. So it's not all musical theater. We devise and create work that's original. In fact, we often don't do work that has already been scripted. The vast majority, 80% of the work we do with Tilt is created and devised by the company.
Wow.
And may incorporate music or may not. That's up to the way that we as a group conceive of every production we do. So we are doing this particular season, just because of not knowing what COVID is bringing at this very moment. We decided it would be better logistically to do two shows that were already scripted as opposed to devising them. But throughout the whole pandemic, everything we did that you can see on our website, we have it a way for people to rent our productions that we did through the pandemic. I think we did something like 10 productions during the pandemic that were all virtual.
Amazing. I really am so inspired by and in awe of theater companies that figured out how to, and artists in general, because because you are one and have been around all of the performing side of things for forever, and it's incredible to see how the theater community specifically has navigated the pandemic and all of these hard hurdles and flaming hoops we've had to jump through. And it's another one of the guests on the show, Danny Romeo, is in immersive theater in London, and has done a lot of immersive theater work in New York as well, and is starting his own immersive theater company. And just hearing him talk about how they navigated things in London with immersive theater when you can't be immersive it's amazing. And it's really special to see that and hear that y'all are still have created that space, did create that space, and are continuing to do that for your company members. It's awesome.
And it's been rewarding and challenging because, some of our folks who are blind, for example, had never done something like use Zoom. So it was cool because because we had volunteers who would literally just get on the phone with these folks And in some cases, we provided data plans for people because they were unable to access those financially. We had volunteers who would get on the phone and spend hours just trying to get someone's video working because they didn't know because they were blind. And they're there in isolation alone, right? So how do you tell someone, well, hit this button when they can't see it? But we have such incredible volunteers who for hours and hours would sit on the phone with people auditorily. And we had one company member who, in one of our productions, in the first act, because of the way it was filmed, we filmed everything over Zoom. In the first act, you just see this company member's photo because they weren't able to connect. This is the person who's blind. And by the second act, that volunteer had gotten, however they did it, I don't know, but had gotten that person to be able to get on Zoom and turn their video on and do all the things.
That's awesome.
As a blind person, totally one person to one person. And so you see this company member on the video in the second. And that's just a story I love to tell because I think it epitomizes why we do Tilt in many ways. And now that person is able to Zoom with whomever outside of Tilt as well. So
yeah, something we completely take, I completely take for granted is the ability to just do this effortlessly, what we're doing now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for taking so much time with me. It's so good to see you. It's always great to get to talk and catch up. And I know I'll see you in person at some point soon here in the next couple of weeks.
You know it.
Before I cut you loose, I've got a couple quick fire questions for you.
Yes.
Just top of mind, whatever comes first.
Love it.
What is a nickname that your parents used to call you when you were a kid?
Ad.
Great. Where did that come from?
Right.
Who inspires you?
Some of the nicknames may not be appropriate for.
It's a podcast. We can say whatever we want. Who inspires you right now?
The Tilt company members, particularly with this production that we're doing, really, truly.
Yeah. What is a piece of content that you can't get enough of right now? Book, podcast, music, TV show?
I've been watching reruns of House.
Awesome.
And that's been, I don't know. I couldn't tell you why, but that's what's kept my
what's on.
brain entertained. Yep.
Great. Last question. You can only have pizza one last time. Where from and what's on it?
Via 313.
Oh, yes.
And it's the, I forget what they call it, but it's the vegan one because I try to eat about 80 to 90% vegan. Great. And they have a great vegan pizza at Via 313. It's really great.
Yeah. Via 313 or Via 313 is a pizza place here in Austin, Detroit style pizza. It is dangerous. They opened one up 2 minutes from our house in Cedar Park here. And it's so dangerous.
Yep. Exactly.
Adam, thank you again. This has just been a joy to get to catch up and see you. And thank you for taking an hour. I can't believe it. An hour and 10, 15 minutes has already gone by so quickly.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it. And it was great to talk to you and hear more of your story too.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll talk to you again soon.
That's great. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Second Cup with my friend Adam Roberts. To keep track of Adam on social media, you can follow his accounts at Adam Roberts Voice, at Resolutionary Works, at Tilt Performance, and at St. Luke Austin. You can also check out his websites, resolutionaryworks.com, adamkroberts.com, and tiltperformance.org. All of these links are in the episode description below to make it super easy to find him and get in touch. Second Cup is created and produced by Tim Heller Creative, LLC. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode or any of the others, I invite you to show support in any of the following ways. First is by sharing episode links on social media and tagging at Tim Heller Creative. Second is by rating and leaving reviews in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening and watching. Third is subscribing, liking, and commenting on YouTube, Tim Heller Creative. And finally, if you want to support financially, you can Venmo me at Tim Heller Creative or reach out to me via email to tim@timhellercreative.com to discuss sponsoring one or several episodes. Again, all funds will be used directly to improve the show and provide the best experience for guests and listeners alike. Tune in next time for another incredible conversation and hopefully to learn something new from a really cool person. Later, skaters!